My name is Olivia, I'm 35, and my parents expected me to accept my sister sleeping with my husband. Before I tell you how I exposed their entire scheme and dismantled their lives with a single leather briefcase, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all came to a head on a Sunday night, a night that will forever be etched in my memory as the moment the curtain was pulled back on my life, revealing the rotten stage set behind it. The air in my parents' house was thick with the cloying scent of overcooked roast chicken and a level of hypocrisy so dense you could taste it. I was standing in the shadows of the hallway, my body rigid, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape a cage of bone. Just moments before, I had excused myself from the dinner table, unable to stomach another bite of food or another one of my mother's fake, pitying glances. Now, through the narrow crack in the swinging kitchen door, I heard the voices that had narrated my entire existence, the same voices that were now plotting my unconditional surrender. "Don't worry, sweetie," my mother, Margaret, cooed. Her voice, a tool she usually sharpened to a fine point when directed at me, was now a syrupy, soothing balm for my younger sister, Emma. "I'll have a serious talk with Olivia. She's emotional right now, but she'll get over it. She always does. She has to." Emma, a master of weaponized fragility, let out a delicate, practiced sniffle. But she looked so angry. I've never seen her look at me like that. "Well, what did she expect?" my father, Robert, chimed in, his voice a low, disappointed rumble. And that disappointment, I knew with sickening certainty, was not aimed at Emma, the adulteress, but at me, the inconveniently wronged wife. Things happen in a marriage. It's done now. Olivia needs to grow up and understand that the family's reputation is more important than her feelings. We can't have this sort of drama getting out. My blood ran cold. It felt like ice water flooding my veins. Family reputation. Her feelings. They were talking about my life, my marriage, my heart, as if it were a minor PR issue to be managed. I pressed my knuckles against my mouth, biting down hard to stifle the cry that was clawing its way up my throat. This wasn't a conversation about consequences or morality or remorse. This was a strategy session for damage control. And I was the damage. I backed away from the door, my movements as silent and precise as a cat's. Each step was a deliberate retreat from the lie I had been living. I slipped out the side entrance, the cool night air a shock to my heated skin, and disappeared into the darkness before they even noticed I was gone. The question that had been burning in my mind for days, the agonizing why, was suddenly extinguished. It was replaced by a new one, a question that was cold, hard, and sharp as a shard of glass. What was I going to do to them? To understand how a family can reach a point of such casual cruelty, you have to understand their one, unspoken, unbreakable rule: Emma gets what Emma wants. I was the responsible one, the reliable one, the quiet achiever who learned early on that my accomplishments were best kept to myself. Emma was the star, the beautiful, charming, effervescent whirlwind who could do no wrong, and whose every minor achievement was cause for a parade. Our entire childhood was a long, painful lesson in this toxic dynamic. I remember with piercing clarity the day my acceptance letter to a top-tier university arrived. I had worked tirelessly, sacrificing weekends, high school parties, and sleep for 4 years. My hands were trembling with a mixture of pride and anxiety as I handed the thick envelope to my parents. My father glanced at it over the top of his newspaper and grunted, "Good job." My mother gave me a hug so brief and tight it felt more like a pat on the back. That was it. I celebrated alone in my room that night, eating a slice of grocery store cake, the letter sitting on my desk like a secret I was supposed to keep. 2 years later, when Emma received her acceptance to a local community college after barely graduating high school, my parents threw a massive party. The house was filled with gaudy balloons and dozens of relatives, all summoned to celebrate Emma's incredibly bright future. My father, who had barely looked up from his paper for my news, gave a tearful, rambling speech about how proud he was of his little girl's perseverance. I stood in the corner, holding a paper plate of catered food, feeling like a ghost at my own sister's coronation. This blatant favoritism didn't fade with time, it metastasized. It followed us into adulthood, shaping our lives in profound ways. When my husband, James, and I scraped together every penny we had for a down payment on our first small house, a fixer-upper that we poured our sweat and weekends into, my parents came over for a perfunctory 30-minute tour. "It's cozy," my mother had said, her eyes scanning our second-hand furniture with a barely concealed grimace. "I do hope you're planning to do something about these floors." But when Emma and her husband, Nathan, bought a sprawling new build in a gated suburban community a year later, a purchase made possible by a 5-figure gift from our parents, Margaret and Robert practically moved in. They spent weeks helping them pick out expensive furniture, consulting with decorators, and buying custom drapes. They were actively building a life for her, a beautiful, effortless life, while I was expected to build my own from scratch and then be grateful for the privilege of their occasional, critical supervision. Even my wedding day, the one day that is supposed to belong to the bride, was not truly mine. James and I had planned a simple, elegant affair. It was supposed to be our moment, a celebration of the love I thought was my one safe harbor in the constant storm of my family. But during the reception, right after the father-daughter dance, Emma, radiant in a dress that was just a shade too close to white, clinked her champagne glass for attention. Beaming, she announced to all 200 of our guests that she and her new boyfriend, Nathan, were officially engaged. The spotlight, which had been tentatively on me, shifted instantly and permanently. My mother wept with unrestrained joy, hugging Emma so tightly I thought she might break a rib. My father beamed. My wedding became the backdrop for my sister's engagement party. James squeezed my hand under the table, whispering, "Don't let her get to you. Today is about us." At the time, I thought his words were a comfort, a sign of his unwavering alliance. Looking back, I see them for what they were, the hollow words of a co-conspirator. My best friend, Sarah, saw it all with the clear eyes of an outsider. After the wedding fiasco, she had pulled me into the ladies' room, her own face flushed with anger on my behalf. "They don't see you, Liv," she'd said, her voice fierce with a loyalty I had never known from my own blood. "They don't see how smart and capable and incredible you are. But I do. Don't you ever, ever forget that." Her words were a lifeline, a small, flickering candle in the vast darkness of my family's neglect. They were a reminder that I wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. I was just the only one in my family who wasn't completely blinded by Emma's dazzling, destructive sparkle. The final, fragile illusion of my happy life shattered on a Tuesday evening. It was a day like any other, mundane and unremarkable, right up until the moment it wasn't. James was in the shower, the sound of running water a familiar, comforting backdrop to our quiet evening. His phone, lying on the nightstand, buzzed. I glanced over, expecting a work email or a sports alert. But a message preview glowed on the screen, a name that made my breath catch in my throat. It was from Emma. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you." The world tilted. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me, leaving me suspended in a silent, airless void. For a long moment, I was paralyzed, my mind refusing to process the 6 words that had just detonated my reality. It had to be a mistake. A typo. A bizarre joke. But my hands, seemingly with a will of their own, moved. My fingers, trembling uncontrollably, picked up the phone. His passcode was our anniversary date. The irony was a punch to the gut, a cruel, bitter pill. I opened the message thread. It wasn't a mistake. It was a history. A detailed, sordid archive of betrayal. Months of it. I scrolled up, my thumb moving mechanically, my eyes scanning a timeline of deceit. There were the I miss yous, the inside jokes that I was clearly not a part of, the meticulously planned secret meetings. "Can you get away for lunch on Wednesday? He thinks I'm having dinner with Sarah." There were photos, my sister and my husband, heads tilted together in a dimly lit bar, his arm slung possessively around her shoulder. The betrayal was so absolute, so devastating, it felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the phone heavy in my hand, my world crumbling to dust around me. When James came out of the bathroom, a towel slung low on his hips, humming a cheerful, off-key tune, he saw my face and froze. The smile vanished. I didn't have to say a word. I just held up the phone, the screen glowing with their treachery. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, grayish-white. The excuses came tumbling out, a pathetic cascade of lies and blame, each one more insulting than the last. Liv, it's not what you think. It was a mistake, a stupid, one-time thing. And then, the one that made my stomach churn with a rage so pure it was almost clarifying, she came onto me. She seduced me. You know how she can be. She just doesn't stop until she gets what she wants. He tried to take my hand, to offer a touch that was now utterly repulsive. I flinched away as if from a hot iron. I spent the next few days in a fog of numb disbelief. I went to work. I paid the bills. I answered emails. I existed. But underneath the placid surface, a cold, hard rage was beginning to crystallize. I decided I had to confront them all, together. I needed to see their faces, to force them out of the shadows of their secret and into the harsh light of accountability. I chose the one place that was supposed to be a sanctuary, the one place where truths were supposed to matter, Sunday dinner at my parents' house. I waited until dessert was served. My mother had made her famous, from scratch apple pie, Emma's absolute favorite. I watched as Emma took a large bite, a small, satisfied smile on her face. The sight of it, the sheer, unadulterated entitlement, was what finally broke my silence. I took a deep breath, my voice surprisingly steady when I spoke, cutting through the mundane chatter. I know about you and James, I said, my eyes locked on Emma. The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Emma's fork clattered against her porcelain plate. She looked at our parents, her eyes wide with a perfectly feigned innocence she'd been honing since childhood. James just stared at his hands, the picture of a guilty schoolboy. I had expected shock. I had expected anger, directed at Emma and James. I had expected, foolishly, naively, some small measure of support from my parents. What I got was a masterclass in psychological warfare. My mother was the first to speak, her voice sharp with accusation, directed entirely at me. Olivia, really? Is this the time or the place for such drama? She's been under a lot of stress at work, my father added quickly, looking at James with a bizarre, man-to-man sort of sympathy. We all make mistakes. But it was Margaret's next words that truly shattered what was left of my heart. She looked at me, her expression not one of compassion, but of profound disappointment. Well, Olivia, maybe if you'd paid a little more attention to your husband, if you'd made more of an effort, he wouldn't have had to look for comfort elsewhere. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. They weren't defending me, their daughter. They were defending Emma. They were actively justifying my husband's infidelity. Emma, on cue, started to cry, those perfect, shimmering crocodile tears she'd mastered as a child. I'm so sorry, Liv, she sobbed, though she couldn't quite meet my eyes. I never, ever meant to hurt you. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping harshly against the polished hardwood floor. I couldn't breathe. The air was too thick with their lies. I walked out of the dining room, a roaring in my ears, and that's when I found myself in the hallway, a silent witness at the kitchen door, listening to them plot the final stages of my emotional execution. That was the moment the old Olivia, the one who always forgave, the one who always understood, the one who always put the family first, died a quiet, unceremonious death. And in her place, something new, something cold and sharp and utterly unforgiving, began to grow. After I slipped out of my parents' house, a ghost leaving her own haunting, I didn't go home. I couldn't face the house I had so lovingly built with James, a home that was now nothing more than a crime scene, a monument to a life that was a complete and utter lie. I just drove. The city lights blurred into streaks of neon and gold through my tear-filled eyes. I drove for hours, with no destination, the hum of the engine a monotonous counterpoint to the screaming chaos in my head. I ended up parked by the old industrial waterfront, the dark, choppy water of the harbor stretching out before me like a vast, empty promise. For the first time since I'd seen that text message, I let myself truly fall apart. The shock, the numbness, the rage, it all gave way to a wave of grief so profound, so all-encompassing, it felt like it would drown me. I wasn't just mourning my marriage. I was mourning the loss of my entire family, the comforting, cherished idea of them that I had clung to for 35 long years. I was utterly, completely, terrifyingly alone. I rested my forehead against the cold, unforgiving plastic of the steering wheel and I sobbed. Not quiet, dignified tears, but raw, guttural sounds of a heart breaking, of a soul being ripped in two. I don't know how long I sat there, adrift in my own misery, the car a tiny, isolated island in a sea of darkness. But as the first hints of a bruised purple dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, my tears finally ran dry. A strange, unnerving calm settled over me. The storm had passed, leaving behind a desolate, barren landscape. And in that emptiness, there was clarity. I drove home. The sun was rising as I walked through the front door into the silent house. Everything looked the same, but it was all tainted, overlaid with a patina of deceit. In the living room, my eyes landed on a framed photo on the mantel, me and Emma as teenagers, smiling our bright, hopeful smiles, her arm slung casually around my shoulder. I picked it up, my fingers tracing her treacherous, smiling face, and I felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, just a cold, hollow ache. I walked into my home office, the one room in the house that had always felt truly mine, a sanctuary from the demands of my life. And there, on the wall, hanging slightly crooked, was my Employee of the Year award from work. It was a simple, elegant glass plaque, something I'd never even mentioned to my family. I knew, instinctively, that they would have found a way to diminish it, to twist it into a slight against Emma, who had never held a job for more than 6 months. I looked at it, really looked at it, for the first time in a long time. It wasn't just an award for good performance. It was proof. It was tangible evidence that I was competent. That I was valued. That outside the toxic, suffocating bubble of my family, I had an identity. I had worth. A switch flipped inside my head, as loud and definitive as a cell door slamming shut. The grief was still there, a dull, persistent throb in my chest, but it was now overshadowed by a white-hot, clarifying anger. They had underestimated me my entire life. They saw me as a doormat, a pushover, the family's shock absorber. They thought they could destroy my life, my marriage, my spirit, and I would just quietly sweep up the pieces and ask them if they needed anything else. They were about to find out how catastrophically wrong they were. I sat down at my computer, my posture straight, my hands steady. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I wasn't searching for self-help articles or online forums on surviving infidelity. I was searching for weapons. I spent the next 3 hours immersed in research, my focus absolute, my mission clear. I wasn't looking for just any family law attorney. I was looking for the best. A shark. A specialist in high-conflict divorce cases, a litigator with a reputation for being ruthless, meticulous, and, above all, for winning. By sunrise, I had a name, a phone number, and a strategy. I booked a consultation for the next day. As I finally went to bed, the sun streaming through the window of a day that felt like the first of a new life, I knew I wasn't just planning a divorce. I was planning a war. The next 2 weeks were a blur of calculated moves and deceptive calm. While my family was busy executing their clumsy, predictable plan to manage me, I was executing mine with the precision of a military strategist. My mother, Margaret, called daily, her voice oozing a fake, syrupy concern that made my skin crawl. "Olivia, honey, you need to talk to us. You can't just shut us out. Emma is just beside herself with guilt. She's barely eating." Robert, my father, sent terse, commanding texts, urging me to be the bigger person for the sake of the family's good name. And Emma, the star of this tragicomedy, sent a barrage of tearful, emoji-laden messages about how she couldn't bear to lose her big sister over a stupid mistake. It was a coordinated, full-court press of emotional manipulation, and for the first time in my life, I saw it with perfect, chilling clarity. I played my part beautifully. I was quiet, non-committal, and vague. I let them think their tactics were working, that I was slowly breaking down, that I was on the verge of crawling back and forgiving them, just like I always had. While they were busy patting themselves on the back for their clever handling of the situation, I was meeting with my new lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Ms. Davies, whose tailored suits and piercing gaze radiated competence. Emotion doesn't win in court, Olivia, she told me during our first meeting, her office a fortress of mahogany and leather-bound books. Evidence does. Hard, undeniable, irrefutable evidence. We need to build a case so solid they won't even think about fighting it. Then we'll get it, I said, my voice firm, devoid of the hesitation that had plagued me my whole life. On her recommendation, I hired a private investigator, a former police detective with a knack for uncovering secrets. The retainer fee was steep, but I considered it an investment in my future. The final act of their little passion play was set into motion a week later. My mother called to announce, not invite, that she was hosting a reconciliation dinner. It wasn't a request, it was a royal summons. James and Emma will be there, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. It's time for us all to come together and heal, as a family. I knew exactly what it was. It wasn't about healing. It was a public tribunal, a carefully staged performance where I was expected to play my assigned role, the magnanimous victim, the gracious wife, the forgiving sister. It was, I realized with a grim smile, the perfect stage for my own production. I arrived at the dinner looking unnervingly composed. I chose my armor with care, a simple, elegant black dress, understated jewelry, and a calm expression that seemed to unnerve them more than tears would have. The air in the house was thick with forced pleasantries and the smell of my mother's expensive perfume. James and Emma sat close together on the sofa, a carefully curated picture of contrived remorse. My parents hovered, their faces masks of strained, parental benevolence. We sat down to eat. The small talk was excruciating, a minefield of forbidden topics. They talked about the weather, about a neighbor's new car, about anything and everything except the colossal betrayal that sat at the table with us like an uninvited guest. Finally, over coffee, my mother cleared her throat, signaling that the main event was about to begin. She reached across the polished mahogany table and took my hand. Her skin was dry and cool, like a snake's. Olivia, she began, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that set my teeth on edge. We all know this has been difficult. But family is about forgiveness. It's about rising above. It's time to be the good girl we all know you are and tell everyone that you forgive your sister and your husband. We need to put this unfortunate incident behind us. That was it. The trigger. The final, unforgivable insult. Be a good girl. I slowly, deliberately, pulled my hand from hers. I looked around the table, meeting each of their expectant gazes, and I gave them a small, cold smile. You're right, Mom, I said softly, my voice carrying in the suddenly silent room. It is time to put things on the table. I reached down beside my chair and lifted my heavy leather briefcase, placing it on the dining room table with a solid, definitive thud. The sound echoed in the tense silence. I clicked open the 2 silver latches, the sound sharp and final. I looked at James. You said it was a mistake, I began, my voice even and clear as a bell. I pulled out a stack of glossy 8x10 photographs and spread them across the table like a winning poker hand. They were crystal clear, taken with a long lens camera. There was James and Emma, kissing passionately outside a downtown hotel. There was James and Emma, holding hands under the table at a dimly lit bar they thought was their secret spot. There were 17 different mistakes in total, all meticulously time-stamped by the private investigator over the last 3 months. Emma let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. James's face went a pasty, ashen color I'd never seen before. I turned my cool gaze to my parents. And you said I needed to think of the family, to think about the finances. I pulled out a second, thicker folder. This one contained bank statements and credit card bills. I was surprised to see so many charges at high-end restaurants and boutiques on our joint credit card, James. And these hotel rooms, I let the words hang in the air. Then I turned to my father. And I was especially fascinated to see this, a $20,000 transfer from your and Mom's joint savings account to Emma's personal account, dated the day after I first confronted you all. My lawyer, oh, did I not mention I have a lawyer, finds the timing very interesting. He called it a potential attempt to fraudulently conceal marital assets from me ahead of a divorce settlement. I tapped a highlighted line item on the statement. Thank you for creating such a clear, damning paper trail. The silence in the room was absolute, a crushing weight. The masks had not just fallen, they had shattered. In their place were raw, ugly expressions of shock, disbelief, and for the very first time, pure, unadulterated fear. I stood up, my movements calm and deliberate, a queen surveying the checkmate she had just delivered. The divorce papers were filed this morning. The petition includes copies of every single one of these documents. I gestured to the incriminating mess on their perfectly polished table. My lawyer is very optimistic about my chances for a favorable settlement. Especially concerning this house, James, which, as you know, I made the down payment on with my own premarital savings. I looked at each of them, one by one, searing their horrified faces into my memory. James, the weak-willed, spineless cheater. Emma, the spoiled, golden child narcissist, finally facing a consequence she couldn't charm her way out of. My parents, the architects of this whole toxic dynasty, staring at the ruins of their carefully constructed world. As for this family, I said, the word tasting like poison on my tongue, I'm done. Consider me disowned. I turned and walked to the front door, not looking back. I didn't run. I walked, my heels clicking purposefully on the hardwood floor. I left them there, frozen in their tableau of disgrace, finally choking on the bitter consequences of their own actions. The door closed behind me with a soft, final click, the sound of my own liberation. The days that followed were a predictable storm of desperation. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls and texts from blocked numbers, a frantic, digital assault. I let them all go to voicemail, listening to them later like a researcher studying the behavior of cornered animals. The messages were a masterclass in manipulation, cycling through the stages of grief and narcissism. There were the furious, threatening tirades from my father about how I was destroying the family name and would live to regret it. There were the weeping, pleading voicemails from my mother, begging me to think of all the good times and not let one misunderstanding tear us apart. And then there were Emma's messages, a bizarre, toxic cocktail of tearful apologies, passive-aggressive guilt trips, and accusations that I was being cruel and unforgiving. I deleted them all. I had built a wall around myself, brick by emotional brick, and for the first time in my life, I was the one controlling the gates. My father, realizing his phone calls were ineffective, escalated his tactics. He showed up at my apartment building one evening, unannounced. He managed to get past the front door when another resident was leaving. I heard the aggressive knock and looked through the peephole to see his red, furious face. I didn't open the door. "Olivia, I know you're in there," he yelled, his voice muffled but still carrying the weight of his rage. "You open this door right now. We need to talk about this inheritance nonsense. You are not getting away with this." I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and spoke calmly, my voice loud enough for him to hear. "There's nothing to talk about. You should probably leave before I call security and report you for trespassing." I heard him sputter in disbelief, followed by a string of curses, and then the sound of his heavy footsteps retreating down the hall. I had stood up to him, and the world hadn't ended. It was a revelation. The most significant development, however, came a week later. It was a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but a strange intuition made me answer. "Olivia? It's Nathan. Emma's husband. The forgotten victim in all of this." His voice was quiet, strained, and full of a pain I recognized all too well. I know this is a lot to ask, and you don't owe me anything. But I keep hearing things, these wild, contradictory stories. Emma's story, it just doesn't make any sense. I need to know the truth. Apparently, in her panic-stricken state, Emma had spun a wild, elaborate tale about me being a jealous, unstable, and vindictive shrew who had fabricated everything to ruin her life out of pure spite. But her story was riddled with holes, and her frantic, selfish behavior in the aftermath had finally raised a legion of red flags for her kind, logical, and thoroughly decent husband. We met for coffee in a small, neutral cafe halfway between our homes. I didn't show him everything. I didn't need to. I just laid 2 pieces of paper on the table between our cups. One was a copy of a hotel receipt from the Grand Hotel, for a suite, paid for with the joint account I shared with James. The other was a printout of a single text exchange between Emma and James, a conversation the private investigator had recovered. In it, Emma complained at length about how boring and predictable Nathan was, how he was always working, and how James was the only one who truly understood her. I watched as the color drained from Nathan's face. I saw the same sequence of emotions I had experienced play out in his eyes: confusion, dawning comprehension, and finally, a deep, soul-crushing devastation. I felt a profound pang of sympathy for him, another piece of collateral damage in my family's endless war of selfishness. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a sad, broken understanding. "Thank you for telling me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Olivia. I'm so sorry for everything you've been through." I knew then that the fallout was no longer contained within the 4 walls of my family's house. The truth was out, and it was about to spread like wildfire through our community, carried by a man who had just as much reason to be angry as I did. The judgment I had delivered at that dinner table was only the beginning. 6 months later, the dust had finally, blessedly, settled. The divorce was finalized. As my lawyer, Ms. Davies, had predicted, the mountain of irrefutable evidence led to a settlement that was overwhelmingly in my favor. They didn't even try to fight it. I kept the house, which I promptly put on the market and sold to the first bidder. I didn't want to live in that museum of pain for a second longer. With the proceeds from the sale and my own savings, I moved to a new city, a beautiful coastal town a few hours away. It was close enough that Sarah could visit on weekends, but far enough that I felt like I could finally breathe clean, unpolluted air. I found a new job at a prestigious architectural firm that valued my skills and experience. I wasn't Robert's responsible daughter or Emma's quiet older sister. I was just Olivia, the talented project manager. Within 4 months, I was leading my own team and had received a promotion and a significant salary increase. It turned out that when you weren't spending 90% of your emotional energy managing the needs and egos of a toxic family, you had a lot left over to pour into your own success. My new life was quiet, but it was gloriously, unapologetically mine. I decorated my new apartment in shades of deep blue and cool gray, colors I had always loved but that my mother had always dismissed as drab and depressing. I adopted a scruffy rescue dog from the local shelter, a mutt named Buster who followed me from room to room and slept at the foot of my bed. And on weekends, I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, a place that provided legal aid and counseling to women trying to escape abusive situations. I would listen to their stories that echoed my own in so many ways, and in helping them find their strength, in guiding them through the labyrinth of the legal system, I solidified my own. I was turning my pain into a purpose, my scars into a roadmap for others. One evening, as I was sitting on my balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, an email popped into my inbox. The subject line was simply "From your mother." My heart gave a familiar, reflexive lurch, but it was weaker this time, more of an echo than a jolt. It was a long, rambling message, a masterwork of self-pity disguised as an apology. It was full of phrases like, "I know we made mistakes, but we were only trying to protect your sister's fragile state, and I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive us, for your own sake." The old Olivia would have agonized over it for days. She would have felt a pang of guilt, a flicker of responsibility. The new me saw it for exactly what it was, another attempt at manipulation, a desperate plea for her own peace of mind, not for mine. I took a deep breath of the salty air and wrote back a short, simple reply. "I have found my peace by letting go. I wish you the same." Then, I did one last thing. I opened my email settings and created a new rule. Any future emails from the addresses of my parents or my sister would trigger an automatic reply. The reply read, "Thank you for your message. The recipient of this email has made a donation in your name to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence." Then, the original email would be moved to the trash, unread. I clicked save. It was over. Truly, finally over. The last chain had been broken. Tonight, my apartment is filled with light and warmth and the easy, genuine sound of laughter. The smell of garlic bread and a simmering tomato sauce hangs in the air. Sarah is here, perched on a stool at my kitchen island, deep in conversation with a new colleague from my work. Nathan is here, too. After his own messy divorce, he's become a good, solid friend, a fellow survivor. We check in on each other, two people who understand the unique pain of being betrayed by the people you're supposed to trust the most, two people rebuilding their lives from the rubble. My new friends, people who know me as just Olivia, strong, funny, independent Olivia, are scattered around my living room, talking and laughing. There are no hidden agendas, no simmering resentments, no carefully worded compliments that are actually insults. There is only warmth and genuine affection. Sarah catches my eye from across the room and raises her wine glass, a proud, brilliant smile on her face. I smile back, a real, unburdened smile that reaches my eyes. I look around at this life I've built, at this family I've chosen. It's not the life I thought I would have all those years ago. It's so much better. It's a life built not on obligation or blood, but on respect, kindness, and the quiet, unshakable strength you find only after you've walked through fire and come out the other side, ready to build something new and beautiful from the ashes. Thank you all for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but it was important. If you've ever felt overlooked or betrayed, what's one piece of advice you would give to someone in that situation? Let me know in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more. You're not alone.